I took what you said before in relation to you couple the two things together, stolen generations and stolen wages. And I was reading part of your work where you talk about the Family as Culture report in 2019. Just noted significant concerns about the use of police during removals. And you said that when the police are used for removal in terms of child protection, especially riot police, special sort of militarised police, this has a historical continuity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's often talked about, both the stolen wages and the stolen generations, as these historical artifacts, and we've kind of moved on and we're a much more civilized country. The reality is, and this was documented especially in a film by Kamilaroi woman Larissa Berendt recently, that police are still very actively involved in child removals, and they will forcibly remove children, and they will use weapons in the process. And we've seen that, I think in all jurisdictions, but absolutely in the Northern Territory and Western Australia, and other parts of Queensland and New South Wales. So I think that we, and I guess I can also be accused of this. We often talk about these things as though they're in the past, and it undermines the continuities.
Yes.
And I could say the same also with stolen wages. There's a Commonwealth development program on foot at the moment where Aboriginal people are forced to work into conditions that are very harsh just to receive their welfare payments.
Yes.
And these programs are set aside for Aboriginal people. So again, these discriminatory regimes are being reproduced, and maybe the language isn't a separate Aboriginal Protection Act, but the effect of these programs is to set aside certain practices for Aboriginal people. And we only have to look, for instance, at the Northern Territory intervention that required in 2007 the suspension of the Racial Discrimination Act, to show how discrimination is still very much alive in our policy. And the effect of that piece of legislation and policy in 2007 that still is on foot today is that their child removal and their youth detention and imprisonment rates have really gone up exponentially. And there haven't been, there were promises of employment, and there were promises of houses. There haven't been, deliveries on those, I guess, benefits that were used to entice and coerce people into this racist policy. So I think we obviously have a lot of work to do for changing the historical record, but yes. I think at the forefront should always be, bringing a magnifying glass to the current practices, which, with child protection, it's often with very little oversight, very little accountability. We might be getting more filming now of police practices of violence and harm, but yes. What happens to Aboriginal children, it's much more difficult to call into question the disproportionate removal of children, which in Australia is 10 times the rate of non-Indigenous children.
Right. I think I've mentioned in another podcast, I commented on this, which I said that the Northern Territory intervention was incredibly problematic because in my personal view, using the military against a civilian population, it essentially makes people enemies of the state. Mm. This issue, because I've worked alongside protection, but I haven't worked in the Northern Territory or the West or Western Australia or those contexts. But I know that in Victoria, it is a multidisciplinary response. This is from the Protecting Children Protocol, which often involves police and child protective services working together. So this is Indigenous and non-Indigenous. There's a lot of different voices that come into this. So I mean, we've had Green Senator Lydia Thorpe talking about stop stealing our children, but we've also had the first female Aboriginal magistrate in West Australia, I think, Sue Gordon, and she said that this was in February 2018, Indigenous parents need to take responsibility for their children.